Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Holloway, and I have the HF lead for DISA, along with some other stuff, but we'll not go there. I've been involved with HF since right around 1964. I was a CTR from 68 to 88, using the great radios called the R390s. Anybody remember those? And then when I was on board the Joey D, they gave us digital radios. Well, we about ripped those out of the bays and threw them over the balloon. But anyways, so we all know that there is a resurgence in HF communications. And why is that? Well, after about 20 or 30 years, maybe even 40, DoD has finally figured out that they've been putting all their communication eggs into one Easter egg basket. And now all your SATCOM stuff is vulnerable to attacks, be it IP attack and or laser attack, or have another satellite come up and eat it. So if you look at the C3 modernization strategy, LOE 4.6 tells the department to look at HF as new beyond line of sight communications capabilities. So with that, what I'm going to do is we have three panelists. We have Lieutenant Commander, aka Farkas, Chamberlain. He's from the Joint Staff J6, and he is one of the chairs of the DoD HF Working Group. Next to him, we have Erica Daly, who's doing HF at JTNC. And next to her, we have Captain Pat Gallagher, who came to JITC most recently from 3rd MEF. And JITC is doing a lot of testing, new waveforms, and interoperability of radios. So what I'm going to do is have Farkas start off and talk to us about the purpose and wherefores of the DoD HF Working Group. You got it.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Hopefully everybody can hear me on this thing. But my name is Lieutenant Commander Ian Chamberlain, call sign Farkas. I am a BA-18G Growler NFO, and I started working on HF in 2021, late 2021, when I got to the Joint Staff, and that was the first time that I really had some experience with HF radios. And the first time I touched one was when I went down to JITC for the last HF Working Group. So that said, I'm still one of the action officers that's a co-chair on the HF Working Group. Essentially, our purpose is to make sure that we don't lose interoperability across the force. So that's a lot of advocacy across the different services to make sure that we're coming up with interoperable solutions, interactions with vendors to make sure that they aren't getting to a proprietary solution that solves all our requirements, and instead look to work with the other vendors that are out there. There is no single vendor solution that is employed by the DoD for HF, and so it behooves everybody to make sure that we have that interoperable solution. So we do that. We coordinate again with services, with vendors, and also with our international partners to make sure that it's not just a US DoD, it is US DoD plus our partner nations that are out there getting prepared for the next fight. That's all I got for you, John.
Well, how about addressing some of the sub-working groups? I know Erica is on the IA group. What about the exercise group with NetCom and some of the others?
So we do have sub-working groups within the HF working group. So those are for NC3, so the command and control for our nuclear enterprise. We also have the interoperability and architecture sub-working group that you spoke about. We do have an exercise sub-working group. You put me on the spot, John. I didn't have that written down in my notes.
Well, see, I was a chief and you're a lieutenant commander, so I can do that.
Yeah, I think that's what you want. But so these groups, basically the overall HF working group, looking at that modernization problem, and each of these sub-working groups are looking at their own little chunk of that pie. We're going to feed that back up through. The sub-working groups are going to work on their little piece of the pie. We're going to bring that up to the overall HF working group and make sure that we come up with a cohesive plan for HF modernization. Does that answer your question, John?
Yes. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Go ahead, Karen.
So, your exercise working...
Wait a minute.
I can just be loud. So, your exercise working group, what are your goals for Northwest this year? Did you hear me, Marcus? Did you hear me?
So, yep, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
With your exercise working group, what are your goal quest objectives this year?
Now you're really getting into it. So for Bold Quest this year, our lead for that is actually the other half of the co-chair, the U.S. Air Force A-26 Warfighter Communications Division. They've taken the lead on Bold Quest, and so they just finished with their plenary sessions right now, which have those codified goals. Unfortunately, I don't have the output from that currently on me, because again, that's the other half of that co-chair piece. But I can get back to you with that, Karen.
So, talking about Bold Quest, is there going to be a NATO part?
When you say NATO part, are you talking about exclusive?
No,
like an exclusive
no,
NATO part, or what?
Because I know Bold Quest is going to happen just up the road here at Pendleton. But is there going to be NATO play in Bold Quest? And if so, is it going to look at wideband HF or what?
So, yes. In short answer to your question, yes. Wideband HF is one of the things that they intended to look at Bold Quest, and our NATO partners are going to be a part of that. So again, this is not we're not just looking from the DoD perspective, we are looking at a worldwide international partner perspective. In addition, when you say it's happening right up the road in Camp Pendleton, it's not just happening right up the road in Camp Pendleton when it comes to HF, it's happening all across the world. So last year we had great success reaching out to different stations, not only across the country, but also across oceans, and the game plan will be to do the same thing again this year.
Alan Bowman from NC3 Enterprise Center, actually an active participant in the NC3 sub-working group. Question is for the broader DoD overarching HF working group. Is there a plan to escalate the classification of those regular meetings? Because quite frankly, for many enterprises, including mine, doing them in class level is, even in the secret level, most of the time is not very productive.
Yeah, I know. I just received a brief from one of you guys. It was totally unclassified, but it just happened to be on a TS network. So I get that's where you guys live on the day in and day out. And we do understand that some of the ways and means and some of the drivers behind either the requirements and the technologies that the NC3 community is looking at specifically are, those are the things that end up driving us up to that classified level. As far as putting HF working group at a higher classification, we had been doing those at the unclassified level. We have since tried to step that up to a secret no foreign or secret rel 5I level to make sure that we include those partners, those key partners that we have. The challenge, of course, comes with that the NC3 piece doesn't always invite all the players in, and it just makes it a little bit more of a challenge because of. Go ahead.
No, I just think one of the key reasons for that is when you mentioned as far as interoperability, one of the things that usually anybody talks in terms of NC3 and they hear Stratcom and oh, that's the devil, mama, we don't intend to do it. They see that as really exquisite requirements that are very expensive, That's not the case. That's not even close to the case because NC3 systems, what would be utilized in systems, are the same ones that are going to be used on just about every other platform. It's just how we employ them and that may take things up a notch. And my concern is making sure that for interoperability, so radios that we're purchasing for fast attack submarines, for surface ships, destroyers, bombers, tankers, they're all interoperable, and we're not going down a road of purchasing radios that perhaps can't support other waveforms that we may wish to utilize in different communities, not just in C3.
Right. No, and I think that's a great point, right? So the radios that are purchased, right? That's an unfortunate term sometimes, right? Because as John mentioned, HF's been around for a while, right? So parts obsolescence, just obsolescence of that particular wave or that particular radio set that somebody may be using for their particular service, and they say, hey, well, I just need a new radio, so they upgrade to the next one without looking at that necessarily what waveforms are on that particular radio. So that's a great point. That open architecture is what we are really looking for in the future. And in fact, is, to my knowledge, and I'll have to go back and check on this just to make sure that I don't put out too much bad data, but to my knowledge right now, all the services are looking at those software-defined solutions. So I'm getting nods from our interoperability experts over there. So I feel a little bit warmer and fuzzier about that, right? So, and that's where the push is basically for all the radios that we have for DoD, are that software-defined solution, so that the hardware matters a little bit less, but the software does matter a little bit more. That does bring up some challenges when we talk about spectrum allocation or different types of waveforms that are out there. But that is a better solution for us in the future and should help to solve the problem. The other thing, or the other way that we'd like to talk about HF, when we talk about HF communications or HF waveforms, the kind of term that we've started throwing around is HF technology, right? Because it's not just about the waveform that's out there, but it's about different capabilities that could perhaps take one waveform, be it digital, analog, take that waveform into a system. Everybody computes that the same way. That gets output in a different way so that we are sharing information across the board, across the DoD, and across our partners. Because like I mentioned before, there is no one vendor solution. So we have to make sure that even when these problems come up, we have to find a way around it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Dr. Daly, can you tell us about what JTNC is doing and what you're doing with HF and so forth? Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Erica Daly. I'm from the Joint Tactical Networking Center here in San Diego, California. That's the JTNC. I'm a co-chair of the HF Interoperability and Architecture Sub-Working Group alongside Patrick Gallagher. So what JTNC, one of our main focuses is on being the knowledge broker for the DoD. So that's one of our major goals is to be the preferred knowledge broker for the DoD. And so we have a partnership with JITC. So JITC, their mission is test and evaluation. So they're the ones that are coming up to us with problems, and once we know what the problems are, JTNC helps create a solution by providing information to folks. What could the problem be? What could potential solutions be? And also, we do hire some experts to modify mill standards as needed. So if the problem, as we'll mention, for a particular HF waveform was that some of the mill standards were a little bit ambiguous. So we went ahead and we worked with Dr. Eric Johnson, who's our mill standard developer, and he came up with some fixes to the mill standards, so it wasn't quite so obvious. So, and also another issue that arose coming out of the work that we've been doing with the vendors, we found that HF governance could be a little bit structured a little bit more structurally. So we are assisting the DoD, the HF working group, as an effort to look at modernizing the HF governance structure. So the JTNC, we're feeding up into that, feeding it information about what that might look like, and just doing kind of like the boots on the ground work. So that's kind of what the JTNC co-chair role is specifically. And then,
So do we have any questions or comments for Dr. Daly?
Hello, Scott Bichette from L3 Harris HF team. Was wondering, is it's either part of the Bold Quest activity or part of this year's goal is to try to further integrate the different governing bodies, even within the DoD or Department of State. As often, a lot of the vendors, we are international vendors, some of us are American vendors, but simply to participate in the standard mill stand that is a open standard per the cover sheet, sometimes is controlled by other governing bodies that we can't participate in that standard. So it basically locks us out from actually working that. So I was wondering if there's going to be any effort to actually broaden the efforts of that governing body.
Okay, who wants that? Farkas.
Well, so there is a.
Uh,
This thing on?
There you go.
All right, good. All right, so I'm going to partially answer your question. We are definitely integrating entities like Department of State. We do have representatives from public safety. They're on the HF working group as well. So those concerns are definitely heard. As far as our international partners, so far the participants that we have had at either this HF working group or past HF working groups have been United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. So again, along those Five Eye lines. But I understand that L3 and other vendors don't sell to just those institutions. In addition to that, the changes that are going into the mill standard for the most part are also going into the STANAGs. So there are other options out there as far as making sure that we have interoperability. Erica, do you have any more kind of clarity on that?
we did just host the NATO Beyond Line of Sight.
We need the audio. Give the audio tech about 10 seconds to turn your mic on. Okay.
We recently hosted the NATO Beyond Line of Sight capability team at the JTNC to enable them to do the work that they need to do for creating new potential mill standards and so on and so forth. Do you have any particular recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective on the joint staff as well, like, you know, obviously buzzwords like global integration kind of float around the building, but I just want to make sure I think that we understand your question, right? Is it?
What I'm specifically saying is a lot of times our technology is labeled as ITAR, or export control through trade compliance and department. So it's not only just to export a product that exists. A lot of times our type 1, even type 3 products are labeled as ITAR. It's beyond that. It's actually to be able to contribute, like right now, just next door, you got HFIA Beyond Line of Sight, actually engineers meeting right now. I cannot contribute technically to that because my contribution is labeled as ITAR. So again, it's one of those things, it's going to be a joint effort to make sure the warfighter can actually work together across vendors. I mean, sitting here with Roden Shorts, a German company, you know, I can't share that even though we're working on the same government program, for example.
John Rosica, I'm actually the co-chairman of the HF Industry Association, and we are meeting over at the Hilton all day today with the NATO group, and then tomorrow the HF Industry Association meeting. It's open to anybody that wants to attend. We'll be at the Hilton, the one next door here, not the one in the Gaslight. And I think I echo the comments of the gentleman from Harris. I think what he's trying to say is a lot of times you make a radio and you get a commodity jurisdiction rating that inhibits you from being able to sell it anyplace else because of features that it has for interoperability. And so that becomes a bit of a problem, and you have to go through tremendous flaming hoops to get U.S. Department of Customs or Commerce and the Department of State to authorize that radio to go into places where you'd want it to go for interoperability. So I think that's kind of what you were saying.
Yeah. As soon as you mentioned, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just the contribution to the standard itself. You know, it's like to be able to work on these governing bodies, these standard bodies. You know, again, as an American company, we are constrained to the Department of State level. So I think that partnership we can, you know, press forward and be able to share some of our goodness, because, you know, we end up developing in a silo, basically, coming out with a good product. It would be great to work together, you know, with JITIC as a government body, or JITIC, you know, whoever, and then, you know, we can agree to a target. So that's why I'm really excited. You guys are defining the target so the vendors can actually react.
Okay. Anything else from Dr. Daly? Moving on. Well, before we go to Captain Gallagher, Commander Chamberlain came up with HADR. Okay, so I used to do HADR back in the day, and several years ago, if you remember Hurricane Maria, when it went in, took out Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, the Virgin Islands lost their ISP. Okay, it was undersea cable. The hurricane took it out. And so I got called by DHS FEMA and asked if there were any Navy ships in the area that could help U.S. Virgin Islands. And the question was, how can we contact them? Well, what I found out then is that there are 5 frequencies in the 60-meter band, which is basically 4 or 5 megs, where DoD entities can talk to civilian entities without being licensed. The ship would come up using their HF call sign. The civilians would use their HF call sign. So what happened was that the FEMA folks, U.S. Virgin Islands, was passing sit reps. I think it was the Essex at the time. And the Essex was then using their network to pass those sit reps back to DC and FEMA. So there is a connection there. Also, the emergency folks in Virginia are building an HF capability down in the Tidewater area just for that, so that they can talk to the ships during, if the ships have to bug out because of a hurricane, they can talk to the ships coming back in and tell them what damage is going on and so forth. California OES, Office of Emergency Services, are building vans, communications vans that have UH-VH HF capabilities. So this way, if the Marines from Pendleton get called up by NORTHCOM to go and help fight a fire up in the woods, they're going to take their 160s. Well, right now, the Marines can't talk to Cal OES. So Cal OES is having HF capabilities. I think they're going to use Collins radios so that they then can talk to the Marines on one of those frequencies.
Just to echo that, it's actually even bigger than that. I'm from California, and Cal OES has actually put together a program that was extended to every single county in the state, and a good chunk of them, we've been equipping them with fully capable 2G, 3G, ALE, AES encrypted, digital voice MELP 12 encrypted radios. Believe it or not, there's going to be a network within the state very soon of HF at every county or critical alerting agencies, which could be sheriff or University of California. They're all going to have HF capability, fully interoperable with a lot of the gear you're fielding on the military side, minus the Type 1 encryption, of course, but you'll be able to do that, yeah. So it's not just vans.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Captain Gallagher, you want to step up and run your slides? I'm not going to run.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Captain Gallagher, JITIC. John, thank you for the introduction. Very, very excited to be here. Before I get started, I do want to say, for those that have Brian McCarty's phone number, he is trying to perform an Irish exit ring to retire without telling anybody. Now, today is officially his last day at JITIC, so for those who have his number, please reach out to him and say, hey, thank you for all your hard work. Brad doesn't retire, that kind of thing. He's not going to like it, but it'll be good. All right. Coming from the Marine Corps, coming from 3 Meth, as Mr. Holloway just said, working with 3rd Meth, Marine to Marine communications. HF is a thing out in 3 Meth, out in Okinawa, Japan. Now, as a company grade officer, me speaking to the Army almost never happens. Just, hey, we don't do that as a platoon commander. We kind of leave that to the majors, lieutenant colonels, the bosses, so to speak. When it comes to coming to JITIC, arriving here this summer, didn't really know what Fort Huachuca was, didn't really know what JITIC was. Upon receiving a letter from the commander, hey, welcome to the unit, here's our mission, started digging into that. I was like, all right, if I was to make all of the HF gears, say, in the US or with NATO interoperable, how would I do it? In my head, I have this in my notes, on my desk actually, I would have every single radio, say, on a test bench. I would turn on said radios, and I would perform over-the-air checks. Obviously, the Marine Corps, most of the different branches here, prior to executing an exercise or an operation, we're doing a systems, technical readiness, and programming exercise. I was like, all right, that's almost testing. I'm gonna go to JITIC, do that. Now, when I get to JITIC, sounds like, yeah, Chancellor McCarty and Duty HF Working Group is literally doing that. And I was like, well, that was pretty straightforward. What's the big deal with this? It sounds like we just turn them on and make them work. Wow, there's a way more to that. If you look at our mission, radio to radio, host to host, and operator to operator, there's a lot of layers to it. Now, in learning from our sailors, especially Chief Officer McCarty, Dr. Daly and JTNC, and all of the wicked smart scientists and PhDs out there, this is where we currently sit. This is what's causing us the most issues. It's going from analog waves to digital, that conversion. Why is that? Yeah, different possible waveforms. I'm gonna pause myself there. So same waveforms, same mill standards, but different implementations. This is where I started to kind of wrap my head around what's going on. Well, we have passed these program vector radios. There's roughly 13 of them in NATO, the US roughly around 6 are fielded. So Harris for the Army and the Marine Corps, Collins and Leonardo in your rotary wing and fixed wing assets. New BAE system coming in for some of the items that this gentleman just spoke about, Mr. Bowman. Now, getting all those radios to perform at the physical layer the same, it's been done before. Happened back in the early 90s with 2G ALE. Now, how did they do it back in the 90s? Well, at a naval conference, found this document. This is Lieutenant Commander Peach. It's from 1991. This is how they made Federal Standard 1045. What they did, as Mr. Pichette was saying, was getting all the different vendors, all the different agencies in one room, performing, hey, consensus-based standards. What should the standard be? What kind of capabilities do we need? Right now, I've heard over and over again, there's no requirement for HF interoperability. Well, if I'm a Marine on the deck and I know the Navy's not going to be coming inside the WES, I'm going to be talking to some kind of aircraft to call for fire and sink some ships. So there's at least one. You talk about, yeah, literally the NC3 asking for HF interoperability before we even start, or as soon as we start this thing. It's there. The requirement is there. It's not in writing. When you start digging into that requirement, I really don't have a lot of faith and trust that the requirement's ever going to come. I was reading an article last night from the Government Accountability Office from 1987, talking about how, hey, we need a requirement. That was 1987, before I was born. Still don't have one. Now, as Commander Farkas just said, hey, we have a standard, a requirement for these systems to be open. We have all the vendors paying out of their own pocket to come to JTNC to come to JIDIC to try and get a standards-based, a consensus-based standard, we're getting somewhere. Now, so you also mentioned, hey, go back one slide. From that analog to digital conversion, there's something going on there. Now, in digging into this concept, I'm gonna try to explain this as accurately as I can. Gave a brief yesterday, right after Mr. James Mahan. I had heard about some of his programs going on, but at the very least, I'm gonna grab some water. Give me 1 second. All right, there we go. So, briefing after Mr. Mahan. I was professionally embarrassed in a good way, though. Hey, I was about to brief, hey, there's all these problems, and they were before me on class. Yeah, we already fixed all of them. I was like, well, that's impressive. How'd you do that, sir? He was literally sitting right next to me. Now, that analog to digital conversion, a flexible network interface, is a software solution. Something that NASA actually did back in the 90s as well for some of their deep space programs. Now, they had all these different vendor satellites from different countries out in around the planet. Those satellites needed to talk to each other, though, to both transmit and receive data from deep space. Now, what I'm getting at is that I literally learned this a couple days ago, or literally yesterday after speaking to Mr. Mahan, but found the article that he recommended that I read. And what it is, it's an edge-of-device software solution that takes each vendor's proprietary software into a black box. No other vendor can see it. Yes, sir, you're gonna talk about? Then there's a government-owned solution that allows these satellites to talk to each other. Open source, hey, NASA's literally distributing it to all these companies, making sure that you have say, A in your PACE plan. C, I can't remember the C, what was the C again? Contingency, but in the actual NASA solution, there's at least 3 in that document. Let me pull it up real quick. All right, so we had the NASA government-made solution. We had the multi-vendor proprietary solutions, and also I was almost a censored network. Anyways, I won't get too much into science. Obviously, I'm not a PhD scientist, but as far as finding a solution, an open network solution to sit at the edge of all of our radios, which there already is a requirement for that gear to at least be modular and to have the ability to say, lose my train of thought. What I'm getting at is that if we can sideload all of our program of record radios with a black box of software that allows interoperability, I think that's the best way to do it. Now, outside of that software solution, we still want to get that physical layer right. Obviously, software ability to be hacked, ability to have some kind of vulnerabilities. At the very least, if we must stick with our current, say, program of record, proprietary business, then we need to get that physical layer right. Now, what we're doing about it follows. Similar to the 90s, executing vendor events in which all the gears on a bench, like we talked about before, we'll get the mill standard out there in one room, 13 vendors. Hey, what should the standard be? What are our warfighters asking? A lot of these vendors, they work with warfighters all the time. They have a good idea what they need. We have program offices telling us, hey, we have a requirement for these warfighters to speak to these warfighters. Well, we actually have the warfighters telling us that there is, so something's got to give. Like I said, most of these vendors, though, are volunteering to pay out of pocket to come to Fort Huachuca or to JTNC, to San Diego to make it actual standard. Now, after deciding what those requirements are going to be, consensus-based standards, just as most it is, they executed an over-there assessment of the location listed on screen. Amazing. It was like World Quest of last year. In the bottom left of that slide, or this one, a worst-case scenario can occur when 2 or more sources are selected to provide program record gear. If the source companies interpret the standards differently, the result can be a lack of interoperability. So in 1991, Lieutenant Commander Peach, thank you. We did not learn your lessons, but we now have hands on that document. We're already executing those good habits of creating a new standard. So that's what we're doing to ensure interoperability down the road, utilizing the MOSA open-based standards, utilizing over-the-air events like this, a meeting of the minds with vendors. So that's a good point that you made with the governance structures as well. We have not been doing that. And then getting some kind of, at the very least, a third COA, being able to sideload all of our program record radios with a flexible network interface, black box the proprietary waveforms, distribute via the JTNC DoD IR. Hey, this is our government-made solution of 3G. This is our government solution of 4G. Distribute to anyone that has a military cap. That's almost a PACE plan right there, PAC, but yeah, you forgot the E still. Anyways, we'll work on that. The last item, I'm gonna skip this one. Keep hearing about BoltQuest. Now, being out here past couple days, I met the Australians. That was, is Brenger? You gone? Anyways, Mr. Johnson's our civilian HF lab lead. We met the Australian HF lab equivalent. And for those of you that are not familiar, they have a $2 billion strategic cell phone network going in all across Southeast Asia, and they want to play a BoltQuest over there. So, sir, we'll get with probably Mr. Mahan as well and execute wideband HF with the Australians. They're literally asking to execute BoltQuest with us. That's all I have for now. I'm getting kind of crazy up here. Any questions?
Any questions for the good captain?
Yeah, we're looking at, as far as refining and trying to nail down standards and so forth, it's kind of a question for both on the joint staff side of the house and you guys. Quite frankly, I mean, grew up as a submarine rating many decades ago, probably before you were born. But,
Back in the day.
yeah, so, but the thing is HF voice it's not viable. I mean, it's not. We're not going to use it, and what we're looking for is
So if I can pause for 1 second.
using this to move data.
If I can pause for, exactly. And my justification for that is the same. Hey, especially in Southeast Asia, the number of Marines or just U.S. service members in general that can speak another language, very small.
Yeah.
Now, if voice or other communications, they can't speak the language, then useless. Now, data, 100% agree. What were you going to say, though?
I was going to say, what is you guys' interactions and evaluations and so forth as far as mesh, HF, review of the JCP North?
So, as far as the project, I kept hearing about it. And I was actually at the DoD HF working group in September when Mr. Mahan and his team came to brief what it was. But for him to brief it yesterday at this M2I brief, I was like, man, this guy got to figure out what is awesome. As far as data goes,
were you able to take a look at the classified briefings?
not yet. I didn't get my hands on it. I got his phone number after. I was like, sir, I was hitting him up all hours of the night last night. Sir, what about this? What about this? Like, I will send you the high side. Like,
I didn't know Jim was out here, or I would have looked him up. But anyway,
Yes, sir.
I would strongly encourage that because being able to push HF, push data, let me rephrase that, because one of the things that has been challenging is even we, through OUSD and through other organizations, we have this HF requirement. No, we do not have an HF requirement.
There's never going to be one. Yeah.
We have a BLOS requirement, and HF is a viable tool to fulfill that requirement. And so
So as far as the other data, I see what you're saying. So what we're doing about data is Dr. Daly and I were on the phone with Marine Corps for BoltQuest this year, and they're the only service members on the line. Obviously, being a Marine, it's like, all right, we're not just going to talk to the Marines on this DoD HF call. What was the question we asked him? It was 10th Marines that are on the DoD BoltQuest HF thread. Do you remember what we asked him? Oh, I asked him, hey, gun to your head, you can only pick one data capability, what's it going to be? And he said, attack. And I was like, yeah, probably what he's saying. But anyways, that's the plan, sir. As far as executing attack over HF, we're doing it at Coalition Warrior Interoperability Exercise 2023 from 15 May until 30 June between Australia, Georgia, the country, and Poland. We're sending attack via Paris gear. It's only going to be Citadel encryption. We're not going to mess around sending NSA stuff all over the world. But at the very least, subterranean keys, pushing TAC over HF all around the world. And then at BoltQuest 2023, doing the same thing. So we can get that physical layer down, get hands-on. We've got hands-on at least 7 different flexible network interface solutions. So figuring out which one will work best. After that, I guess the next step in the order of events will be over there TAC, just a little bit more easy.
Hi, good morning, Dave Wilkinson from the Nuclear Enterprise Center as well. How you doing, sir? I have a general question for the panel, and that is, aside from JITC and the State Department, who's working towards a World Radio Conference to enable additional frequencies for the wideband?
So that discussion is ongoing, and DoD CIO is taking the lead on that with help from Department of the Navy.
Awesome.
So that's a call that we had. Did y'all hear that one with the Google guys? So I'll give it to you offline. We have a possible solution. We're going to create it right now for that kind of thing. But our unit, JITC, will be testing dynamic spectrum allocation gear. But we have the CRADA as far as getting a pretty cool solution for dynamic spectrum allocation for those frequencies here.
And so the second comment I have real quick is that in order for us to become interoperable between the services, we need a culture change. And that culture change comes from the fact that the Marines buy their radios in a certain, it comes down as a requirement, goes to your PIM, you guys go buy the radio that you need, right? Likewise, the Navy does the same thing, the Air Force does their thing. And so it's really difficult because we're running into this right now where one of the services, I'm not going to mention which one, went off and bought a radio, we can't mesh it right now. So, but it was an incremental step because they needed the radio in the platform to be able to meet FAA requirements.
So are you from Nywick?
No, I work real close with them.
Yeah, that was what I spoke to Mr. Mahan about, sir, about making that mesh almost as a new standard. Hey, you need to be able to interface this. If you're trying to play ball out in the Pacific, this is almost a quasi-software standard, whatever you want to call it. I 100% agree.
Yeah, because the threat is changing all the time, right? And so we want to use every asset available to us for situational awareness, isn't it?
Right. So the requirement would be, hey, can you interface with the mesh? Yes or no? Pass test. Awesome. Obviously, there's way more admin than that, but that's what you're saying.
Thanks.
No, that's a great point that you bring up, and that's I alluded to it earlier, but that is part of that. Hey, it's not just a waveform, it's not just a frequency range, it's a technology, right? We are moving to a different technology. It's kind of been touched on a couple different places, but beyond line of sight communications, when you look at the capabilities that we have in the DoD to do those things, there's you can count on one hand the frequency ranges that we end up using for that, and that key piece touches with what the captain was saying about the very same thing that's done with SATCOM. That's a great solution for HF, right? But it's just that the department hasn't been looking at it like that. They haven't been looking at it like it's SATCOM.
Same stuff we already have,
right?
but use it in different ways. Yes.
Right. So that's part of that culture shift. That's part of trying to talk about HF in a different way. Side-loading radios, whatever whatever we need to do in order to kind of spread those ideas around. Absolutely. Understood that there are some policy obstacles that are in the way of vendors being able to operate with each other, and that's some of that stuff's being worked on. But again, that's something else that we have to think about and maybe even legislate in order to make sure that it's a little bit better. Obviously, I'm not a legislator, so that's something that we can provide advocacy for, depending on that solution. But definitely, like you said, it's a culture shift. It's a different way to think about HF rather than keying the mic, hearing a bunch of white noise, and then trying to get that garbled communication across. It's not like that anymore, right? The technology is different. The way we can implement that technology is different, and so it does take. We have to change the paradigm on HF. So unfortunately, it's happening at a time where we knew there was a problem back in, 91 on that dock? Yeah, so we knew there was a problem back in 91. We kind of thought that, hey, there might be a solution here, but now we're kind of getting to it. So the machine's moving a little bit slower than we wanted to, but we're going to have to get up and run to make sure that we stay ahead.
Okay. Okay, we're on. So to bring you up to speed, I heard mesh networks. Okay, part of the HF modernization strategy for PACAF is to put a HF mesh network up across the Pacific. They have it all laid out and how they want to do it and where they want to put their sites at. And within that, they have the mileage between them. Another part of this is, okay, why is DISA involved in HF? It hasn't been involved in HF in 19,000 years. Huh? Well, yeah, well, we got JITC doing it, but at DISA headquarters, there is a JITC lab. And in that JITC lab, we have finally remoted a 160 from the lab to the antenna farm, which is about 2.5 miles away. We're using fiber for that, but we have an issue, we can't send data. So we got to get the Harris guys in to fix that. But DISA has formal international agreements with various elements of communications with Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. So what's happening now, because of my white hair, is that I am the, like I said earlier, the HF guy at DISA. So we are now adding HF to those international agreements. The latest one to be updated was with New Zealand and Australia. We're working on the UK. And the one in Canada has been in place for a while because they're doing a lot of work with Northcom. So I think that about wraps things up, but what I want to put out there right now is that on May 1st and 2nd at DISA, we are going to have an HF symposium at the secret no foreign level. And if we want to go higher, we can go higher and go up to the skiff. The 2nd and the 3rd, and maybe the 4th, we're going to be at the Baltimore Convention Center. The HF Symposium is going to move from DISA to the Convention Center to be in conjunction with FC at TechNet Cyber. So we're going to have that going on as well. Like we did last year, every year it gets a little bit better. We're going to try to have a classified spectrum brief. Dr. Mike Zapman from R&E will be there. And a few others, Rich North from NIWIC, to talk about some classified waveforms. We're looking at getting Tom Grant from Indo-PACOM J6 to talk about the Indo-PACOM Relief Network IPRN, because that's all about HADR and the guys out in the Pacific. To add to that, when I was out in Hawaii for TechNet Hawaii, or TechNet Indo-Pacific, General Miles came up to me and says, hey, we'd like to get Japan involved in our HF activities. There is a division-sized force of Japanese self-defense Marines embedded with the 3rd MEF in Camp Foster. So he wants to get those folks involved in what we're doing. We're also working with the 311th out at Schofield. And we're working with MIT Lincoln Labs, John Hopkins APL. Because some of you old guys know, up around the Arctic Circle, seeing how the Arctic is kind of like melting, if you shoot HF up there, there's a big sponge. So the idea is, how do we get around that sponge? So Lincoln Labs and APL are working on that, and we're working with the Canadians and some of our guys in Mars and so forth to try to figure out what the spectrum is to get around that sponge. So if there aren't any other questions, again, May 1st, 2nd, classified, 2nd through the 4th, unclassified. and hope to see you in Baltimore. Oh, I got a question.
Have you had any considerations involving the amateur radio community? There's 800,000 HF readers out there.
We do that, that's part of Mars. Okay, Army and Air Force Mars, there's about 2,500 volunteers. Paul English at NetCom is the Army Mars, Chief Army Mars, and Dave Stapchuk, who retired recently, I don't know who's in charge at Air Force Mars. The amateur radio operators can join that, and we can work with them on that. That gives them the authorization to use certain DoD frequencies. NetCom does 4 HF exercises a year that is basically related to that with active duty players. And then during Armed Forces Day, we do an HF exercise crossband where we talk on one frequency and they come back to us on another. So we're working with it. We're also part of SHARES, FEMA SHARES program. And then on the DoD side, the DISA HF site at Fort Meade is part of the National Capital Region HF net, SHARES, Civil Air Patrol's involved, and a bunch of other stuff going on. Any other questions, comments? I got another one.
Hi, Ed McCall from Towers UK. So a deciding contrarian point of view of, we've talked a lot about interoperability and working together. But looking at the flip side of that is, how do we encourage novelty and innovation? Because by definition, you know, that first person to come up with that novel technique is by definition not interoperable. And how do we not lose that innovation if really we're just focusing on standardization, which we're 100% on board with, but I'm just being difficult.
No, I 100% agree. I think that look at some of these service members out there that mess around with GNU radio on the side, opening up these radios to almost have them be bare metal switches or routers, for lack of a better word, allowing service members to sideload their own waveforms onto your ear.
Yeah, and I think he also spoke to that when we talk about that innovation piece, right? I mean, we should be coming up with new ideas. Each service has their own research. I think we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, at least for our DoD. You know, every service basically generates their own requirement that trickles all the way down to get to that technology. So those developments are being made, and I definitely point taken on the caution for what are we losing if we focus so much on standardization, right? So
I 100% agree. I was looking at the brief that happened just before lunch, having a container in which, hey, fully secured, has all the different, say, storage and computing power to actually execute software-defined radio, but then allowing service members to just, hey, play around on it, learn it, but then once you start to get good at it, then hey, this is LPI, LPD waveform. This is our, looks like all the different, all the different ham radio operators in the Philippines. This one looks like theirs, but I made it, something like that. So yeah, you're gonna have to get all the governance bodies and vendors together to get a standard, but then opening up that same box for a DISA-approved container, go inside and allow service members, especially the radio operators, to mess around on GNU radio, open source platform, or equivalent, something like that. Seriously.
Hi, my name is Yin Zhao. I'm a research professor at the Navy Postgraduate School. So I have a question related to the innovation research. So I have a project funded by ONR about cognitive AI radio. Basically related, I guess, the automatic link establish ALE standard, I guess. So the new technology is supposed to be better managing those frequencies so you can fastly looking for those gaps and then adapt it to the environment. So we have research up to like how to tune those. Like one thing, we use flex radio, which is the little bit high-end HF. So I was wondering, what's your comments on those kind of research? Right now, it's still in a lower readiness level, so I'm looking for support to get better. So we have two and trying to get a third node, but each node like one's an FPS, another one's in ODU.
Yes, ma'am. How big is the actual file size of the program? It sounds like it's cognitive radio. Is that accurate?
Yeah, cognitive
How big is the
HI.
file?
What do you mean?
How big is the program? Can you load it into a textbook laptop, or does it need to be like a server?
Right now it's in a server. It's in a web server.
Is that probably more?
And it takes the input from the fax radio.
Got it. As far as assisting ALE on SBIR, we have DARPA Cancun. They just put out a call to have different capabilities like this assist, accept feeds from their sounding network. That just came on SBI. I'll get you offline, man. I'll send it to you. Absolutely.
And are you working with NIWC Pacific at all?
Probably. Kind of better. Somehow it's from them, so I haven't really connected yet. But probably
yeah.
will.
While you're here, why don't we connect you with
Yeah.
the NIWC people as well?
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Well, again, thank you and hope to see you all in Baltimore.